Welcome to the Justice Journal podcast. I'm Sacramento County District Attorney Anne Marie Schubert. I hope you enjoy this podcast series where we discuss important public safety issues and provide insight into who we are as an office and what we do both in the courtroom and in the community to provide the highest level of public safety through prosecution, prevention, and innovation.
Thank you for joining us for this podcast episode. Today we're going to start a two-part series on the topic of animal abuse. We have several guests joining us today, so I'm going to ask each of you to go ahead and introduce yourselves, including your background and history with your work with animals. So, Jace, start with you.
Jace Huggins, Chief Animal Control for City of Sacramento. I started actually in the veterinary medicine world. I worked at the UC Davis Vet Med Teaching Hospital in the intensive care unit. So kind of a natural adrenaline junkie because of the career path I took. And I actually ended up in animal control because I was trying to get my foot into sheltering. I never imagined myself staying there, but I have come to love being an animal control officer, the enforcement aspect, and the community engagement that I get to do. So I've stayed and have moved up into my current title.
I'm Dr. Sara Harrison. I'm a veterinarian in Sacramento. I also work as a forensic veterinarian with the Sacramento Task Force. I have a master's degree in veterinary forensics on top of my DVM, so I advise on cases, and I also perform necropsies and cruelty exams for forensic purposes.
And we'll talk about that in more detail. And then Hilary.
Oh, yes. Well, I'm a prosecutor here in Sacramento for many years. I'm going into my 30th year pretty soon. And I was always asking for this unit, a vertical unit, as well as a task force, and was fortunate to receive that towards the very beginning of 2018. So I've been holding that vertical position. So it's a team of one attorney. And we have filed many cases, and a vertical team means they are handled by the same prosecutor from filing all the way until the disposition of the case, which is a good thing. It doesn't travel through multiple district attorneys. And hopefully we're making some changes in the mindset of Sacramento.
Before we get into the meat of the subject, Hilary and anybody else, can you first define what constitutes actionable animal cruelty?
Well, I'll bet everyone at this table has their own personal view and personal opinion of what would constitute animal cruelty. And I would say our opinions are pretty, well, involve a very high standard. But as far as actionable animal cruelty, most people can find the sections in PC 597. It's a series. I would say that in Sacramento, we are filing 597 subsection A and 597 subsection B more frequently, and there are other smaller sections, but those are the sections that involve malicious and intentional abuse, as well as endangerment and neglect.
Okay.
And I would add on to what Hilary said when you talk about the kind of varying interpretations of animal cruelty. I teach a class where I show a picture of a goat being put on a surfboard and surfing, and make the reference of you can take that to a whole span of people and have a group of people who thinks it's totally fine and funny, and another group of people who think, oh my God, that's absolutely horrible. How could they do that to the animal? So it is important to look at the concept of actionable animal cruelty, what fits in within the law and what we can actually pursue.
That's a good point. And then on top of laws, are there ordinances that are different or that animal control uses?
There are ordinances. We try never to have a local ordinance that would either conflict with or cause issue with the state law. So we typically have our 597 penal code laws, and that's what we use for cruelty. For our city ordinances, we use, it's kind of a lower level. So we look at general cleanliness, something we wouldn't want to take the DA's office, but we feel the owner should be fined for. There's some breeding laws. There are laws about having shelter, that kind of thing. So we do have some lower level laws, but they don't contradict with what the state laws are.
Hilary, can you talk about the Animal Cruelty Unit in a little bit more detail and the work that you're doing there? And if you can, what your caseload is like, and just generally some examples of the cases.
I would say at all times, even when we first started, the caseload increased very rapidly. The word got out, and with that, we began training not only the law enforcement agencies in Sacramento, but also animal control officers. So there was just so much training that was going to be necessary to make this work. We had a criminal investigator here in our office, in the DA's office. Her name is Joyce Thorgrimson. She's retired Sacramento police officer and training officer. And so she took on the police department, training them. I went out and trained all the smaller agencies as well as the sheriff's department, went to different briefings, all 3 briefings that occur all day long, and to train them and put on a presentation so they understood the importance of the animal cruelty laws and the fact that we could file felonies and that we would file felonies and that we would get resolutions on cases that they no longer see. And a lot of the crimes that used to be felonies but are no longer felonies because of Prop 47 in the California legislature. So animal cruelty has not been affected by these laws or these reductions in the effort of criminal justice reform, as they call it. So it's important that they be filed. It's important that they be investigated. We have known for over 30 years that there's a link between animal cruelty and the same perpetrators committing acts on children and their wives and their girlfriends and just violence in general. We have always known that, but I think society is starting to accept it more. And I think that there's an outrage when we talk about animal cruelty, just as we talk about child abuse and elder abuse, and there should be. The public has no idea the level of violence and brutality we see in the cases. They have no idea the types of neglect and ignorance there is for animal care when a community is saturated with animals. You know, we are, it's like a teeter-totter. We are balancing the desire not to euthanize. And with that comes adopting animals and making animals more readily available. And that is not always good. And we just are behind in the education to make sure that that can successfully take place. But there will always be a saturation and a surplus of animals, and there will always be this thought that we need to get them out the door. And with that, if society doesn't step up and doesn't catch up in what they know and how they treat animals, then my caseload will just go exponentially higher. That's what we're seeing. And I'm running on here, but I can say that when we see the crimes that have been reduced over the last few years, the last 5 years, whether it's methamphetamine possession, I see so much of that resulting in animal abuse, spousal abuse, child abuse, because there is a fallout from that addiction, from certain drugs. And so I think that's what we see. And so when they say they're victimless, whether it's the mood change, mood instability, life instability, lifestyle, and it always falls on the animals or the weaker beings.
Right. Let's talk about the task force, and Jace and Dr. Harrison, if you can talk about your involvement in that, how that's changed, Jace, particularly for you, how that's changed your job and your role. So we can start with you on the task force.
Absolutely. So the task force is, it's a blessing. It's kind of a double-edged sword because for the city of Sacramento, we're incredibly urban. We're very densely populated. So my department manages the 99 square miles of city of Sacramento, population of about 500,000, estimation of about 250,000 animals in there. So our department runs with about 150 pending calls for service at any given time. So every morning the ACOs come in, the animal control officers come in to work, and got 150 calls, and they're guaranteed another 30 to 50 to come in that day. So that's how our department has been running for many, many years. With the creation of the Animal Cruelty Task Force, we have kind of redirected some of that human power towards really trying to dig in on these cases towards more training for how to do better. When I first started as a field officer for animal control, we would find a possible cruelty case. We would take probably about 15 pictures. We would write up about a 1-page report, and we'd come on down to the DA's office and say, okay, this is what we have, because that's all we had been trained to do. Now we have had specialized training from the DA's office on how to, and Hilary mentioned Joyce Thorgumson, and she really has been just the motor behind moving a lot of that training forward and teaching all of the animal control officers how to get better reports made so that the DA's office doesn't go, I can't do anything with this, and put it in the round file. Animal control officers in the state of California don't have any mandated style of training like police officers go through the academy and everything. We have some voluntary training that they can take, but it still does not go into the depths and breadth of what you really need to learn to be a good investigator and put a good case together for the district attorney's office. So we really tried to step up on that and ramp up and find other ways to do that. And I think we're going to talk about training in a little bit. So that's kind of part of what we've really seen the change in, is redirecting our focus. It does take a little bit longer, obviously, because the deeper you dig, the more time you have to spend on something. But I also think that it has created an empowerment to our officers who sometimes felt a little bit helpless before. I think this task force has given them that ability to feel like they really can make a difference, and they're working hard to learn everything they can to really do that, instead of feeling like their cases are just going to get blown off or thrown in the trash because it wasn't good enough.
Right, and no accountability.
Accountability. Yeah, and the second thing for me for the task force that I think has been great is it's created a really good networking. Here in Sacramento County, Hilary takes in cases from Rancho Cordova, Folsom, Citrus Heights, Sacramento County, City of Sacramento, Elk Grove, where all of those places have their own animal control units. And prior to the task force, we pretty much all drove down our lane and did what we did. And now we're coming together on a regular basis. We have each other's phone numbers. There's a lot more bouncing off of each other and helping. And my officers, my city officers actually just went down to Elk Grove to help them with a large seizure recently. So we've just got a lot more cooperation and working together, which to me really can only improve the lives of the animals here in the county. So
kind of helping to cross-train each other.
Yeah. Yep.
Dr. Harrison?
So my role in the task force is I generally get called by Jace most frequently, but by members of animal control or law enforcement on cases of cruelty, most often when the victim is deceased, to do necropsies, or in the human world we call it an autopsy, to determine cause of death or the factors that contributed to death, as well as to determine if there was a level of suffering that occurred beforehand. And so I write up reports and give them over to Hilary and the investigating officers, and from there they decide whether they're going to prosecute and what they're going to go after charge-wise.
She should preface it with incredible reports.
Yes.
Thorough, the most thorough necropsy.
They're very long reports.
Very long, and I will say more meticulous and more thorough than I see in a human autopsy.
Wow.
If you were to see it, it's, when I say incredible, I mean incredible. So,
well, and a lot of that's because we're much more limited in what we can do in pursuing animals, like investigating animals. The budget's a lot smaller. We don't have an entire criminal lab at our disposal. Government funds that are guaranteed for, doing all the testing in the world. We basically have like our investigating officer who's collecting stuff at the scene and me. So, we kind of have to take the place of all of that extra testing and stuff that a human victim would be entitled to because, of all the mandated, statutes and everything. We just don't have that. So we have to kind of make up for it. And also because of the nature of a necropsy, that's evidence, but it's in the process of investigating it, you're basically destroying the evidence. And so you have to be very, very thorough because, that also becomes like the defense also has access to that material, because you can only really do a necropsy once. You can't do it twice.
How many cases do you do? A lot of them?
I mean, I do a fair number. I have to balance my time between, because I'm also working full time as a veterinarian in practice. You know, it varies. It seems like sometimes we go through like spurts where we'll go a couple months and I won't hear anything, and then I hear from Jace every day for a couple weeks. So I 1 to 2 cases a week, is not unheard of if we're averaging it out. But like I said, sometimes we'll go a month and not see anything. So
I want to add into what Dr. Harrison was just saying. I think when people think about the idea of when a human dies and there's suspicious circumstances, it is this automatic thing where the body goes to the medical examiner, gets an autopsy, because that's how the system is set up. For animal cruelty, there is no funding. So when we ask Dr. Harrison to come in, I actually have to go to our nonprofit and ask them on a regular basis to provide me with funds to pay Dr. Harrison, because it is not part of the animal control budget for any department around here to pay to have necropsies done. It is not a standard procedure or a standard assumption that this is what will happen. So that's kind of a huge change. And I also want to note the rock star that Dr. Harrison is. She often works her full-time job, comes to the shelter after work, and stays at the shelter into the wee hours of the morning to help us, which I think is an amazing level of dedication and
That's right.
much appreciated.
Yeah. Jace, is it your decision then when to call Dr. Harrison in? So you
Typically,
make that call?
Yeah, sometimes I make the call before Hilary even knows about a case. Sometimes it's, there's no black and white line for sure. Like, we may have a case where I'll call Hilary and say this, that, and the other, and she'll say, yeah, let's get Harrison in. And most of the time, because of the limited funding, my preference is to make sure we at least have a general idea of a suspect, because we can spend a lot of money on whodunits. And while the necropsy information is absolutely great, unless there's going to be like a piece of paper with the name of who did it in the body, I need to make sure that money goes to another one that
something that we can actually prosecute.
That we can actually prosecute.
And get a conviction for.
So like recently it was on the news about the 6 puppies that were found in the trash can. We're not going to pay for 6 necropsies right now because as of right now, we don't have enough information, And normally, if that were a human type case, like there wouldn't be any thought about it. You wouldn't have to think about, do we have enough money in our donation fund to be able to get a necropsy done on these animals, which in my opinion is pretty sad, but we're getting better. The task force is a first step, and we're hoping that the more we get out there and the more we're able to talk about this, the more people will see the importance of this.
Yeah,
And we can preserve some of that evidence should we get a lead on a case, because we have several that are outstanding and there are certain rewards that are sometimes offered. So we can freeze certain evidence, and then Dr. Harrison can be brought in later should we feel the need. I should say a couple things here. The Front Street Shelter as well as Bradshaw do have nonprofits attached to them that are run by volunteer board members, professional people here in Sacramento, and they are invaluable when we need the money to be used for an investigation, and they have never let us down. Either one of the shelters has let us down. When Dr. Harrison does a necropsy, a forensic necropsy, it's so much different. There has never been a time when I haven't wanted Dr. Harrison's work over other vets, and that's simply because they don't conduct forensic necropsies. And so when they volunteer early on, I'll do the necropsy, and a smaller agency goes ahead, and because they're under contract with that particular facility, they go ahead and hire that person. It will be less expensive, and it will not be a full forensic necropsy. In fact, sometimes the necropsies can actually hinder what we are trying to do with a case. When I say that, it's because they're not thorough enough, they're not experienced enough, and they're certainly not trained enough. So it's very important that we have someone that with the forensic background that she has, and it's worked out very well.
Is that unique then? Your expertise sounds like it's unique.
Yeah, I would say it's fairly unique. It's a small group of us. There's only been specific training for veterinarians and forensics for the last decade or so. So we're slowly kind of matriculating through and getting out there. I think there's only a couple. I think, as far as I know, I'm the only one that's practicing in the area and doing it. I know there's a couple other people who've been through the training just kind of for their own kind of fun thing. But veterinarians in school don't typically get a lot of or any forensic training. We're taught a lot about normals and what's sick and gosh, what we should be looking for and that we should be reporting cruelty, but no real training on what to do once we afterwards.
Yes.
And so we have veterinarians in the community who their hearts and heads are in the right place. They don't have the training, and it's not their fault. They a lot of them don't know what they don't know. Other vets they're just busy. A standard forensic necropsy takes me anywhere between 6 to 10 hours. I don't know a practicing vet that has that kind of time in their day schedule to do that. And on top of that, I'm lucky that we have organizations that are willing to help pay a little bit, because prior to that, we were getting a lot of feedback from vets in private practice that I can do these things, but the investigating agencies didn't have the funds or were expecting the vets to do it for free or for a nominal amount, which everybody wants to put vets in the money grubbing category, but to give up 8 to 10 hours of your day, it's a lot of work, and it takes money and time and expertise
on top of
everything else you're doing. And so you'd end up with results like these one-page reports that don't really have a lot of usable information, and they definitely hinder you more than they help in a lot of points. So
it sounds like we're lucky.
We're very
very lucky.
Yeah. So Hilary, and for all of you, how has the task force helped in prosecuting crimes? And if you want to get more into the training that you're now doing, and with Dr. Harrison's expertise, how has that helped in your cases?
When you have a vertical caseload and you have the officers and the agencies calling, you are in a very unique position to triage that development of the investigation, or triage the way the case is going to come in. And even though it's their responsibility and they are submitting the case, you're at least able to direct them or instruct them or suggest certain things. And I think that is what prosecutors don't have the time to do. And I barely have enough time to do it because I have a healthy caseload. And I always carry 15 to 20 felony cases at any given time. So I make sure that I'm available 24/7 to officers, law enforcement, as well as animal control if they have issues. And then I tell them the things that are going to be needed if they don't know. Slowly but surely, certainly city animal control, Front Street Shelter is where we want them to be. Jace has stepped up and made sure that it's a priority to have the officers well-versed in the law and in what is necessary for a fruitful prosecution, regardless of the level of prosecution. Certainly it adds more work to an animal control officer's day. It does. They have a lot of calls, they're running from call to call, but they should never lose sight of the fact that it is part of their job duty. If you look at the specs for all the agencies, the director is empowered to enforce the law. The state penal code is a state law, and that is part of their duties. So they absolutely should not be and are deficient if they're walking away from a situation and they're not writing a report or telling their superior officer that there was cruelty there. And does it make for more work? Yes. Does it make for work that they're uncomfortable doing, that they don't have a real comfort zone in? Probably. It will be that way for the first few reports, the first few times they testify, the first few times they go through the investigatory process. But if they never do it, they will always feel uncomfortable doing it. It's like going to trial. It's like going to prelim. We all have that learning curve, and then we have a comfort level after. But law enforcement, the sheriff's department, the police department, and the smaller agencies, they have huge affinities for animals. I mean, there's just no doubt about it. And it didn't take much to make a presentation, and all of a sudden the cases start coming in from patrol. And then we can supplement from that point on, but we have to have the cases come in at that baby stage and have it documented and have the databases and everything a certain way in the beginning. And just getting them to that point has been difficult, but we still have been successful. I mean, we've done incredible things in a very short period of time, and I can only hope that it will carry on.
So it's made a big difference.
It's
made a difference.
Well, we know that Sacramento wants it. There's no doubt about that. We know from the feedback. Does that mean we're reaching every single person that is doing horrible things behind closed doors? Because it's all gone up with the internet and things online and the dark web and all the nasty, horrible things that we have known are out there. It's all gone up. It's all increased. We're not getting all of it. We're getting the tip of it. But that's more than most jurisdictions are doing. I know we're going to talk about this again later with other folks that are coming for another
Part
podcast.
2. Mm-hmm.
But this is all about education in our society. However you feel about animals, it has to start with the treatment of animals and an education on how to treat and how to have compassion. And if there's one thing that drives me nuts and many people that I speak to, it's that we have no education for children in the schools. And they just don't know what's right or wrong when it comes to the treatment of animals, especially if their parents are deficient to start.
We'll circle back to that.
Mhm.
Jace, can you elaborate any more? So Hilary said is challenging or was challenging to change the mindset. So what have the Sacramento Animal Control done in training and to sort of get them to a point where they're writing the reports and whatever else is involved in the enhanced training?
Yeah. So we've always sent our officers to what's called the Basic Humane Academy, which kind of touches on some report writing and investigation stuff. I think it's like 6 hours. One of the things that we've done since is we've started looking at the other classes that are available to police departments that do not require post-certification because we're not post-certified. So recently we've started sending a bunch of our officers to the interview and interrogation class up at the Public Safety Center. We're looking for classes that ABC, the Alcohol and Bureau Commission, they send their officers to. Any type of training we can find that doesn't require post-certification, but will provide that level of in-depth explanation of how to do a good interview, how to put a good report together,
That investigation side?
Yeah, so anything we can find on the higher end of investigation, up to actually we're looking at sending them through the forensic photography class because it's looking like we're going to get a waiver for the certification on that also. So it takes a lot of legwork. I mean, I won't lie, like I do a lot of begging and groveling, I'm like, I know we're not, post-certified, but this is what we do. This is, we're under Penal Code 830.9, which says we have the power of arrest, search, and seizure of a peace officer when we're on duty. And a lot of people don't realize that. So part of this, and I would bet money they touch on this a little bit in the second series that you do. We're talking about the task force, but really this is a result of the bigger picture of societal's change of how we view animals, how we view shelters, how we view animal control. So many people, when you think of animal control, you think of Lady and the Tramp and the dog catcher running down the street to grab up the dogs and take them to the pound.
Right. To protect the people versus protecting the animals.
Right. Our officers hardly have an opportunity to pick up a stray animal in this day and age. We're going out to welfare calls. We're going out to cruelty calls. We're going out to owned animals that are showing aggression or having issues. I recently pulled some statistics for our shelter, and we've seen a 20% increase in dealing with owned animal situations, whether that be welfare, aggressive animals, cruelty. More and more our job is moving towards dealing with the people and what's happening with their animals than dealing with animals that are just willy-nilly running around the city. So the entire workload is changing for animal control officers as that perception continues to change. People are really more concerned nowadays about how owners are letting their animals be treated or letting their animals affect the neighborhood in general.
And that's good.
Yeah, it is good. It's more work, but it's good. It's nice to see that slowly but surely we're kind of seeing more of the importance. I often equate animals with children, innocent, voiceless. There's not, they really can't defend themselves, anything like that. So I would like to see a continued perception of that move forward, and for animals in those horrible situations to be brought to our attention so that we can do something about it.
So let's circle back to the education. I know, Hilary, you feel very strongly about that. So do you do any education? Does the shelter do any education on that?
We do when we can. We ran a couple of kids camps where the kids came to the shelter. When I was at a different shelter previously, we did a summer camp, which I thought was really great. That was a nonprofit. They had donation money to do that. Again, a lot of times this comes down to funding. If I had my way, it would be part of a standard curriculum for all kids. Period.
Right.
Yeah.
And from your perspective, Dr. Harrison, just based on what you see, is there a message that you would want the public to know from your experience in working on the cases?
Well, it's interesting to circle back a little bit to what he said and Hilary said earlier, about, the connection between, child abuse and animal abuse, is that in this country, most people don't know that animal abuse laws predate child abuse laws. You were actually, so the first laws were actually for animal cruelty, and you were still allowed to beat your child, but not beat your horse. And it was actually the ASPCA and the founder Henry Berg who
Was this national?
Yeah, this was like 1866. That's when the ASPCA was formed in New York, and after the first cruelty laws were passed, and then Henry Berg and some of his buddies, it's a fairly famous story. You can Google it, but there's a child that was abused, and there were no laws protecting it, and it was the ASPCA that came in, and so for a long time, the ASPCA was animal cruelty, but also like a child welfare organization, and they split. And child welfare is obviously taken off and done its own thing, and we have all sorts, but the whole society kind of got lost there in the middle. And while there have been a lot of advances, we've backslid a little bit in a lot of ways, with our feelings on on animals, and they're kind of taking a back seat. And it's been nice to see the last few years here in Sacramento, kind of people being like, wait, no, we can do all these things. We can protect, we can care about children, we can care about battered spouses, and we can also care about animals too, and recognize that there is a huge link between all of those, and that by caring for one aspect, we're caring for a lot of them. And so I tell people, it's just keep your eyes open, and if you see something or hear something that seems weird to you, just call. You don't have to investigate, but if something seems off to you, you have a neighbor who has a new dog every 6 months, that's not normal.
Right.
Let somebody know about it. We depend on the public to kind of be our eyes and ears. And for a long time, maybe people felt that nobody was hearing them, and so I'm not going to report because nobody's going to do anything. Well, now we are. We're within the limits of what we have available, we're doing our best, and we going after, and by helping animals, you're really helping people too, and helping society as a whole.
Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. You can find all of the Justice Journal podcasts on our website at sacda.org, iTunes, Google Play, and YouTube.